start. Okay, good. What about Facebook?
Yes, we are live.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Jai Bhim and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what part of world you are joining this event, and Happy New Year to all of you. This is 53rd lecture in the Ambedkar lecture series organized by Boston Study Group, a not-for-profit Ambedkarite organization in USA, working in New England region of America. Boston Study Group founded 6 years back to spread the awareness about the caste-based discrimination in India, its impact on lives of millions of people, and dehumanizing life so-called untouchables or Dalits have to endure. We do this by organizing studies of Baba Saheb's literature, sponsoring the conferences on these issues, providing financial supports to deserving students from India to attend such conferences, and providing humanitarian help in situations like what we are going through now. 40.3 million people are victims of trafficking worldwide, 71% of whom are women and girls who are mostly sexually exploited. 25% of the victims are children who are in forced labor, sex trafficking, and even forced marriage. A global report on trafficking in persons launched in 2021 by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime gathered data from 155 countries. The executive director of UNODC, Antonio Maria Costa, said that many governments are still in denial. There is even neglect when it comes to either reporting on or prosecuting cases of human trafficking. He pointed to the fact that while the number of convictions for human trafficking is increasing, 2 out of every 5 countries covered by the UNODC report had not recorded a single conviction. According to the report, although trafficking seems to imply people moving across continents, most exploitation takes place close to home. Data shows intra-regional and domestic trafficking are the major forms of trafficking in person. Dear friends, human trafficking may be happening in your backyard, but you may not be aware of it. The 2021 Trafficking in Person reports released by US State Department highlighted the human trafficking in the context of global pandemic. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, a growing number of people experiencing economic and social vulnerabilities. The economic and social distress generated by the pandemic and related mitigation efforts exacerbated the risk of vulnerable and marginalized population. These included women and children, people affected by travel restriction and stay-at-home orders, and communities in areas of food insecurity and survivors of trafficking, as well as persons directly and indirectly affected by the disruptions of economic activities and reduced livelihood options. Due to school closures, some children lacked access to education, shelter, and or food. Survivors of trafficking face an increased risk of potential re-victimization due to financial and emotional hardship during this crisis. The human trafficking, though impacts more to people from vulnerable communities like ours, we never did look into this. To understand this overlooked menace of modern day slavery, we have with us Minal Patel Davis. Minal currently serves as the director of the Mayor's Office of Human Trafficking and Domestic Violence, and previously serves as the special advisor to the mayor on human trafficking, the first municipal level position of its kind in the US for 5 years. Appointed in July 2015, Davis is charged with making a local impact on human trafficking in the 4th largest city in the US from a policy level perspective and by advancing system changes. She developed and is currently implementing Mayor Turner's anti-human trafficking strategic plan, which is the first comprehensive municipal response to human trafficking by a US city. Davis is passionate about helping other cities in their own anti-human trafficking efforts and designed and delivers the city's 10-10 human trafficking response municipal fellowship, a two-day immersion program for mayors and their executive staff to develop their own municipal approaches. Davis has spoken on several local, national, and international panels to present the City of Houston's approach. She is a past speaker at the United Nations World Humanitarian Summit, the US Conference of Mayors, and recently traveled to India and Canada at the request of the State Department to discuss municipal leadership in trafficking with government officials. In 2018, Minal was awarded the prestigious Presidential Award for extraordinary efforts to combat trafficking. In 2019, Minal helped establish the Houston 2026 Bid Committee's Human Rights Subcommittee and serves as chair and is coordinating the human rights risk and solution associated with hosting a mega sporting events like the World Cup should Houston be selected as a host city. In 2020, Minal was promoted to director and now also oversees ending domestic violence with an inquiry and economic security lens in response to the pandemic. Her work has been covered on NPR, in the Washington Post, New York Times, and other national and international media outlets. Minal received her JD and MBA from the University of Connecticut and a BA from New York University. So Minal will be speaking for 35 minutes and followed with 20 to 30 minutes of Q&A. With this brief introduction, Minalji, stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for joining this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you may be joining from. I'm very happy to be here with you today. And today I hope to share a little bit of what I've learned over the years in this role over the last 7 years. I'll be here, of course, like he said, to talk to you about human trafficking and irregular migration. So I'll go ahead and get started. Let's see if I could advance that slide. There we go. Just a little disclaimer, our city legal requires us to have this. This is intended for general awareness purposes. Nothing in here should be construed as legal advice or services. So let's get started. The introduction and purpose. Today we'll talk a little bit about sex and labor trafficking. We'll define that for you. I'll also give you an overview of the Houston Mayor's Office, the division that I run for Mayor Sylvester Turner. And just a quick note on mayor's offices in the United States. They're analogous to state ministry leaders abroad. So whereas mayors abroad may not have a lot of power, mayors in the United States oversee police departments, they oversee health, they oversee airport systems. So it's very different, much more like a state ministry leader abroad. I will also go over some lessons from Hurricane Katrina, which sort of hit the Gulf Coast, the states of Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi in 2005. If you all remember, it did get world coverage. We were also hit by Hurricane Harvey in 2017, but the legal precedents that I'll be discussing with you are from Hurricane Katrina that hit a different regional area of the United States. We'll also talk about some disturbing trends concerning South Asian workers, and we'll do a little bit of a Know Your Rights presentation just in case it's helpful to spread the information to friends, family, people you may know back home. So sex and labor trafficking defined. It's the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone to perform a commercial sex or labor act. Force, fraud, or coercion is not required if the person involved in a commercial sex act is under 18. So there can be no such thing essentially as a child prostitute. If there's a child that's selling sex, they're automatically considered a victim of trafficking here in the United States. Traffickers often utilize illegal debts, recruitment fees, deception, immigration status, threats, physical force, and other means to exploit individuals and force them to work. An example of force is using physical means to compel work, such as at gunpoint. An example of fraud is luring and trapping victims through deception. So you might learn that there's a job in a restaurant that you can have here in the US, and instead you end up in a brothel being forced to sell sex. That's an example of fraud. An example of coercion is debt bondage and threatening the victim's family back home. Now, I also wanted to make sure I drew another distinction between smuggling and trafficking. That's a very important distinction to draw here in the United States. These are two different bodies of law here and two different legal frameworks. So while physical movement is an element of smuggling, it's not required for an act of human trafficking, despite what the term trafficking implies. Human trafficking is best thought of as a crime against the person, while human smuggling is a crime against a political border. So when they're smuggling, the person being smuggled is generally really cooperating, right? Here in the US, a person in Central or South America may actually pay someone called the coyote to cross the border into Texas or Arizona and into the United States. So they'd be cooperating in that instance. Smuggling always crosses an international or political border. There's no actual or implied coercion. Persons that are smuggled here in the US are violating the law. Persons are typically free to leave, change jobs, and it facilitates the illegal entry of persons from one country into another. And smuggling is transportation based. There has to be movement. Now, smuggling, I will say, leads to a lot of vulnerabilities that can lead to trafficking. But again, in that case, people are consenting to being smuggled and in fact seeking out assistance to cross that border. In trafficking, like I said, it must contain an element of force, fraud, or coercion, again, unless the person in a commercial sex act is under 18. It need not involve the actual movement of the victim. We've had the unfortunate case here in the US where a mother might traffic or sell her child for sex out of their own home. Persons must be involved in some kind of labor services or commercial sex acts. They must be working. I use quotes there. And trafficking is exploitation based, unlike smuggling. Now, I want to give you an overview of the Houston Mayor's Office, and you'll see the breadth that we do have when I talk about comparing a city mayor's office here to a state ministry leader instead of a municipal or a mayor's job abroad that doesn't have as much power. When I was appointed 7 years ago, there was no other position like this in the United States. So we had to create our own roadmap. And that meant that I would engage in 6 months of a national and a local landscape analysis to determine the city's strategic direction. So we talked to over 250 stakeholders to decide what the gaps were in our local community, but also what was happening nationally. We took all of that information and essentially did a SWOT analysis. So we examined the strengths and weaknesses of the mayor's office, and what resulted was the first comprehensive municipal level strategic plan in the United States to combat trafficking. It's a strengths-based gap filling plan. So this is very much a reflection of what we've seen here in Houston and what we'd like to see. So we are in the third phase of the plan right now. This is the 5 objectives that we came up with at first that we still work under now. So the first objective, where we saw a ton of opportunity, was to institutionalize the city of Houston's response and implement trainings at scale. We would have these small nonprofits that do great work doing trainings, but they wouldn't have numbers in the thousands and things like that. And we knew that we can effectuate that through the city. We have 22,000 employees at the city of Houston and 22 official city departments. So for institutionalization, what that looks like for us is analyzing and passing ordinances, which is a local law. For example, we're the first city in the United States, major city in the United States, to have a hotel ordinance requiring all of the city's 550 hotels to certify that they're trained in trafficking to our administration of regulatory affairs. We also work on change departmental policies depending on the function of the department, and we'll also use the mayor's power to sign an executive order. So we really serve as a mobilization office for city departments to ensure that they're functioning in the anti-trafficking space. Our health department has 1,200 employees and sees more than 60,000 people a year, and they screen and refer potential victims of trafficking to services. We have a municipal courts program where, in case someone doesn't make an outcry and they are in fact arrested, they can talk to a social service provider. If they talk to that person, a trafficking related or prostitution related charge would get dismissed. We also use Houston Police Department. There's about 5,600 police in our police department here locally. They have an investigative unit that investigates trafficking, but they also have a huge branch of regulatory police, and we often use them to enforce our regulations that in turn pings the owner or the operator of the illegitimate establishment where trafficking might be going on. We also have training at our airports, and we have a procurement policy that I think I'll talk about a little bit more later. If not, I'll summarize at the end. The second objective is to raise awareness and change public perception. We've ran massive media campaigns here that have generated close to 100 million impressions over 8 months. They've been on TV, radio, buses. All of our 950 Metro buses were able to even leverage the power of Metro that reports up to the mayor's office. We also hold events to engage influencers and raise the level of dialogue here in the South. My favorite event that we hosted was called Conscientious Capitalism, Labor Trafficking and Supply Chains. And that was meant for the corporate community that have these global footprints and that have a great impact on labor internationally. And remember, this is a strengths-based gap filling plan. And so no one was really communicating to the corporate community about the impact they can have. Third, we do the macro, as you just heard, but we also do the micro. And we actually have a direct services platform, and I have 2 case managers on my team, and we've created a screening and services platform. We've created a shelter collaborative where the nonprofits that do outreach and they encounter people in crisis that may be trafficked, they have immediate access to shelter. They're never turned away, and they also get a housing intake there. And we've had several clients get housing, which is instability or a vulnerability here that leads to domestic trafficking. We've also put up the first human trafficking psychology fellow, the first hospital case manager to help expedite appointments with therapists and doctors, and we do that through an interlocal agreement with another government here. It's called the county government, which is larger than the city government because they run a massive hospital system here. We have a policy council that has helped us do direct outreach, translate materials, engage the taxi industry, and they support the city's strategic plan in many, many ways. We also have our 5th objective, which, because we were the first city in the US, we knew we wanted to establish Houston as a municipal model, and we knew we wanted to prompt these other strong mayor systems to do similar things to minimize trafficking. Now, over the years, we've also had the privilege of working on mega sporting events, disaster response. There's a lot of things happening with climate change. And then, of course, the global pandemic response. So just to go back a little bit to our replication efforts, the Houston Mayor's Office hosts the 1010 sessions that Sanjay Sir mentioned in his introduction. But we also do a lot of different things. But I'll talk about the 1010 sessions first. We hosted these 2-day immersion programs to make sure that we were replicating pieces of our model across the United States to different mayor's offices. So on the left-hand side, you see the 18 cities that were invited to come. There was a foundation that funded all of the expenses for them to come and spend 2 days with us. We have many replication, over 67 initiatives that are being replicated across the US because of these 1010 sessions. We had New York, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, Austin, Dallas all participate. And because of the success of the domestic 1010, we chose to host an international 1010 where we had foreign governments join us with the same foundation funding the expenses. So together with the international 1010 and the United States Department of State that has asked me to travel, I've actually been to India on their behalf as well as Canada. We've been able to have an international impact as well and replicate our model in some parts of the globe. So if we talk about the irregular migration piece, which starts to really impact our South Asian brothers and sisters, I'm going to take those lessons from Hurricane Katrina. Again, that's the hurricane that hit Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi in 2005, which is a different region in the US if you're not from the US. So in the years since Hurricane Katrina, companies have been sued by workers and the United States government for relying on forced and trafficked workers to fulfill both skilled and unskilled labor needs. So there's some operational challenges that arise when you have a massive natural disaster like that. Usually you have contractors that move into the area, the recovery area, to avail themselves of increased public and private short-term and long-term contracts for recovery or rebuilding efforts. Oftentimes they're incredibly lucrative. So you see migration associated with that when it comes to businesses. Contractors may underbid to win the award. Again, it may be worth multiple millions. If labor is scarce, of course, that depends on market at the time. Contractors will use these foreign guest worker H-2A, H-2B visa programs to fill those labor shortages. And you can have both documented, undocumented workers that are vulnerable to exploitation due to limited protection and monitoring of these construction or rebuild sites. Now that, of course, leads to a vulnerability of workers where you have a needed rapid response. It can lead to lesser due diligence of a contractor. Like I mentioned, lesser verification of the sites. You have a contractor who may be looking to increase profits by procuring the cheapest labor, sometimes illegally through exploitation. We'll certainly see that in the 4 cases I'm about to discuss with you. And oftentimes you have fraudulent contractors as well. And oftentimes you have people that were already in the US working on the right visas, doing things that were said that they would be doing, but then redeployed for relief efforts. We'll also see an instance of that. So we'll do these 4 case studies. There's a progression in the 4 cases. We see more and more justice dealt as the cases progress. And again, these are all legal precedents that arose after Hurricane Katrina. And because these legal precedents existed, we did a great deal of work after Hurricane Harvey to mitigate against this. And now that we're 4 or 5 years out from Harvey, I'm proud to say that so far, nothing like this has come up in our region. So we were able to learn from this. So there's the Decatur Hotels case in 2006. They were accused of charging workers exorbitant fees. Workers paid $3,000 to $5,000 in fees and were given less work hours than they were promised. With the fees, this resulted in below the minimum wage level, and workers were on H-2B visas from Central and South America. So they saw no justice in this case. They did not win a judgment. They didn't win anything, quite frankly. And so the Department of Labor did issue a clarification on the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is a national federal law here that helps regulate these types of things, that workers' fees count towards prevailing wages. And in this case, they said since these fees were charged, essentially the workers were paid below a minimum wage, right? But a federal district judge in this case decided that this notice or clarification was not effective retroactively. That's why these workers did not see any kind of justice in this case. But I'll go to case study 2 in the construction industry. In 2007, another case was brought against Million Express Manpower. In this case, you had workers from Thailand that actually won $1 million default judgment. Million charged workers $11,000 in fees for agriculture jobs in North Carolina. And workers were instead sent to do construction work in Louisiana. That's that sort of redeployment I talked about. Workers were also held hostage by armed guards who confiscated their immigration documents. This too was covered in the New York Times. In this case, even though they got that default judgment, the workers weren't able to collect on it because of the company's insolvency. Now, the third case concerns the education industry. So just to be clear, essentially what happens after a natural disaster, those hotel jobs were vacated, construction jobs were vacated, teachers vacated the districts, right? Their homes have been destroyed. And so actually took in a lot of refugees from the Louisiana area into Houston. And so they'd abandoned these jobs, so they needed to be filled. So that's why this was happening. So in 2010, we have the Universal Placement Agency that was addressing a teacher shortage. Here we see a little bit more progress. Of course, more time has passed, more awareness has been built. So the jury awarded $4.5 million to Filipino teachers who filed a class action lawsuit, finding that this Universal Placement Agency violated California state laws. UPA was a California-based recruiter that's helping to recruit teachers for the New Orleans School District, which is an impacted city from Hurricane Katrina, and they charged 400 recruits $5,000 to $6,000 in fees to secure jobs and H-1B visas. There were thousands of Filipinos that interviewed for these 400 jobs and went into debt to pay these fees. Now, one thing UPA did is once they paid these fees, they charged them a second set of fees in the thousands of dollars after they'd secured the visas. And since they'd already been in, or taken out debt, I should say, they went ahead and did that as well. And when they arrived, they threatened the teachers with deportation when they complained. But we are seeing progress. They did collect here as well. So that was good. Now, the biggest case coming out of this concerned the oil and gas industry, which Houston has a reputation for, and of course, the Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi area has a reputation for. So this was a good case for us to use as we raised awareness with our community here, the corporate community, to make sure this didn't happen here. But in the signal worker case, it was a 2015 case, a jury awarded $14 million in damages to Indian workers exploited by Signal and its associates. And this time they used the Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is what we as advocates and victim advocates would want to see. So workers were already in the US on H-2A and H-2B visas. Here they were charged $10,000 to $20,000 in fees by the recruiters. Signal retaliated against those who spoke out against these bad working conditions. It was really squalid conditions. And there were about 500 Indian workers that were trafficked in this case. So common elements through these cases is worker exploitation, of course, right? We're seeing recruiter conduct that's particularly suspect. We're seeing limited oversight of contractor and recruiter behavior. We're seeing both skilled and unskilled workers being exploited. Workers are charged high fees. There's retaliation if they complain. There's an exploitation of their immigration status. Some were from overseas, some were already in the US. But I do want to point out that even though I'm talking about post-disaster efforts, not all workers are exploited for post-disaster efforts, right? Some are recruited or trafficked to meet regular labor needs. So with that, I'd like to talk about this major builds kind of case with places of worship. And these are the allegations in a recent BAPS case that also concern South Asian workers. In mid-May, the New York Times reported that federal agents descended on a massive Hindu temple site in Robbinsville, New Jersey, after accusations of forced labor associated with this massive temple build. 3 federal agencies were involved in the initial actions and investigations into this temple build for labor and immigration law violations. The workers were brought to the US on R1 visas, which is a religious worker visa.
Sorry to break. I think we are getting breaking voice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me, should I repeat anything there?
It's still breaking.
Okay, let me see. How about now? Is that any better?
Yeah, little bit better. Yeah.
Okay, should I repeat anything in this slide, sir?
Yeah, you can start from this slide at least.
Okay, I'll start again. So one of the more recent cases where there's allegations of Indian workers again being trafficked for labor is this case here. Let's see. Let me just make sure I can move the slides back and forth. So I don't know if you heard me here. I'll just repeat myself very quickly and I'll go back. Mid-May, New York Times reported on a federal raid essentially that happened on a massive temple site in Robbinsville, New Jersey. There were 3 federal agencies that were involved. The workers were brought here on a religious worker visa and were presented as volunteers to the government. They were 90 plus workers removed from this site, and they were posed to the US Embassy as skilled carvers or decorative painters. They were instructed to say that. So the workers' allegations are that they were lured by a prominent Hindu sect known as BAPS, that's Bocha Sanwasi Akshar Purushottam Swaminarayan Sanstha is what it stands for. They'd been promised temple build jobs with standard work hours and time off. Instead, they worked 13 hours a day doing a variety of tasks. They were paid the equivalent of about $450 a month, $50 in cash, and the rest would be deposited in accounts in India. With the hours that they worked, this resulted in being about $1 an hour. Their passports were confiscated or withheld. They were confined to the fenced-in guarded site. They were living on site, hidden from view in trailers. They were also forbidden from talking to visitors and religious workers. And we will see, of course, that there may be another reason for this instead of just their allegations that they were being trafficked, and that's that many of the workers were Dalit or from the lowest in India's caste system. So what is BAPS? BAPS is the fastest growing Hindu sect in the world. Followers believe that Swaminarayan is God. BAPS has a worldwide network of over 3,800 centers. At least 1,100 of these are intricate, beautiful temples that have been built all over the world, including one about 30 miles here in Texas from where I sit. Most of the followers are Gujarati from the northwest state of Gujarat, India. Followers often have the common Gujarati last name Patel. My maiden name is Patel. Not all Patels are Swaminarayan. Not all Swaminarayans are BAPS or abused people. There was a wonderful Ambedkarite attorney that's brought this case to light. Also, I wanted to talk about a sex trafficking case. And this is also a very old case, but because the TVPA was not in place here nationally, it didn't get the attention it deserved. So when I'm talking to the South Asian community, I like to talk about this as well. So the Dalit girls from poor families were sexually exploited by a 64-year-old real estate tycoon, one of Berkeley's richest landlords, who's now deceased, but he earned $1 million a month from 1,000+ rental properties. And this was in about 1999. So a federal investigation also found that Lucky Reddy had been carrying out a conspiracy since 1986 to bring approximately 25 Indian laborers to the US through false pretenses from his South Indian village. In addition to sexual servitude, he forced many of the women, the girls, to work in his Berkeley restaurants, clean and maintain his rental properties, and justified not putting them on payroll because he was providing free food and accommodation. There was a carbon monoxide leak where some of the victims were staying. It killed a victim. She and her sister had been brought here to the US by two of his relatives that were in fact siblings, but posed as the girls' parents. While he was facing 38 years in jail, he served less than 8 years and paid only $2 million in restitution. So I did also want to spend a little bit time this morning to make sure we did a little bit of a know your rights section. So there's rights you have regardless of your visa status. You have the right to be paid fairly in the US, to be free from discrimination, free from sexual harassment and sexual exploitation. Certainly in the allegations in the BAPS case, you have the right to a healthy and a safe workplace, right? Including medical treatment, protective equipment, training, housing, bathrooms, potable water, soap, clean water. You have the right for medical emergencies to be treated. You also have the right to request help from a union, an immigrant, or a labor rights group. And you have the right to leave an abusive employment situation. My team did a chart on H-2A and H-2B visas, and here are the sort of commonalities. There's some differences, as you can see. I'll let you review that on your own time. But the overview of these two visas is that fees should never be paid to a labor recruiter. A contract must be provided in the language the employee understands, as must contain detailed information about wages, work duration, hours, benefits, including transportation, housing, meals. Employees also have the right to be paid fairly, even if they're working at a piece rate. Employers must either provide or reimburse the worker or the person they're bringing here for any reason. It could be an au pair, it could be anything, for inbound transportation and subsistence from overseas by the time you complete half of the contract period. There's a little difference there. Once they complete the work contract, the employer must provide or pay for their return transportation and daily subsistence. The employer may be required to reimburse for inbound travel and visa costs in the first work week if the employee's wages minus their expenses total less than the US minimum wage. Generally, employers must offer employment for a total number of hours equal to at least 3/4 of the workday, and employers must also provide transportation from employer-provided housing to the work site. Employees are exempt for US Social Security and Medicare taxes, so they should not be seeing any kinds of deductions like that on pay stubs and things like that. Additional rights based on your non-immigrant status. I want to also talk about this R1 visa now that we have those allegations in the BAP case. It's a non-immigrant religious worker visa. You have to work temporarily, at least part-time, 20 hours per week on average as a minister, a religious vocation, or some occupation. The employer must be a nonprofit religious organization in the US or a religious organization that's authorized by a group tax exemption holder to use its group tax exemption, or a nonprofit organization that's affiliated with the religious denomination in the US. They must be a member of a bona fide nonprofit religious organization in the US for at least 2 years before applying, and work for up to 30 months with extensions are possible for an additional 30 months, not to exceed 5 years, so 60 months total. The USCIS, which is the immigration service here in the US, may inspect work locations to verify the hours, compensation, duties, and they may even initiate a post-adjudication inspection if fraud is suspected or if a petitioning entity has undergone substantial changes. So change of location or employment may constitute a material change to the employment terms and conditions and require an amended petition, which a lawyer would be able to help with. I also wanted to put a picture here of a visa in case we're sharing this presentation after and others will see it. A non-immigrant visa is a US government document that permits individuals who travel to the US to request entry for a particular purpose, and it must be applied for at a US embassy or consulate abroad. I wanted to point that out. Now, the question is, will you be deported if you report the abuse? So there are programs to protect people who report abuse. Now, I do have to say, if you don't qualify for some of the T, which is a trafficking visa, or a U visa here, you can be deported, but we'd still encourage people to speak out and make sure that their immigration concerns don't outweigh the the conditions that they're asking to be justified, because you do have these remedies available to you. You just need a good attorney to help you get the T status, U status, and there's even a continued presence status if you're going to be testifying. So these non-immigrant classifications were created to protect victims of sexual assault, of labor trafficking, of sex trafficking. And many people in the US here are unfamiliar with T and the U non-immigrant status. So you may need to advocate for that if you find yourself in a situation like that. So I also like to leave people with this. The National Trafficking Tip Hotline is 888-3737-888. It's a very easy number to memorize. It's literally 888-3737-888. And you can call that. They speak over 200 languages here in the US. They're funded by the US government partially, and they're 24/7. And you can report a trafficking tip there, and they're also able to help you connect with services on the ground in the location that you're at. So that concludes my presentation today. I'm going to stop the screen share, and I believe we have some time for Q&A.
Thank you, Minal. It is really very informative presentation. There are a lot of new things we learned about the trafficking, and kudos to you for doing all these efforts to whatever means we can curb any situation or control the situation. And so I will open for the Q&A. So if anybody has the questions, so please raise your hand, and we'll go from there. So meanwhile, I just, okay, so Jagannath ji has the questions. So Jagannath ji, please go ahead.
Yeah, Namo Bodhaya, Jai Bhim. Preeti ji, let me compliment you. To me, it looks like a reflection of what one Deputy Secretary in UN remarked about Jai Bhim Ambedkar. She said, Ambedkar understood that inequality challenges well-being. I was remembering your presentation, and I want to cut short my response by asking, see, US rules are very good, theoretically. When it comes to the question of, except for a few very specific, exposures like what you did, to me it looks like it's a minuscule. It's a symptom of a, it's a symptom of a system which is precarious, which is exploitative. It is continuing the same, centuries old global exploitation. It was Europe which was doing earlier. It is USA which is doing now. I want to ask a simple question. See, we have drug trafficking, which is #1 business in the world, drug trafficking. Then comes the all other things. I think you are very much aware. Let me quote one example and stop. See, I was in Maryland University in 2019 for 6th Planetary Defense Conference. $5 billion were announced by NASA, USA, to protect New York City from a proposed asteroid hitting New York City in the year 2029. Second, in the COVID, in one of the UN webinars, I learned the US announced as much as $80 billion. Now at COP26, I was a virtual participant from UNDP. $150 billion were announced. I want to ask a simple question to you. Being a part of the system which is responding to the human rights and be a model, is it possible that the civic societies in America, for example, Boston Study Group, they are accessible to the actual information, actual cases? If, for example, what you presented, where the Dalits are used in the name of constructing temples, you see, and diverted from other genuine reasons like Katrina cyclone, etc. I think I need an answer from you as a, as a person, as a committed for the Dalits and all the exploited women, men, etc. You see, please try to throw some light on this. Accessibility of information on the real cases which have been sued and compensated, they'll become a great case. Because right now I'm a resource person for NASIN, Government of India agency, where we are looking at climate resilient water security. You see, I can definitely ask, because also I'm a roaster a member in the roster of expert for SBC, Secretariat Basel Convention of UNEP. You see, being a part of the UN, I feel very strongly, persons like you should give us some sort of an opportunity for interested, academicians and researchers under the umbrella of Boston Study Group, so that it can be a big, whale of a difference. It makes whale of a difference. We do also have civil, legal fraternity in India who look forward.
I think
I think I made my point clear, Sanjay.
Yeah, please.
And thank you very much.
So let Minal respond to that one, your question. So
sadhu,
okay, Minal. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
So if I understood correctly, I do believe that there are systems responsible across the globe for the exploitation. I know that there's a great deal of awareness and that there are efforts and advocacy to help repair these broken systems. I would say that me being sort of an insider, we have often joked and call ourselves a disruptor of these systems because we are asking, especially at this municipality, using all of the systems available to us, right, like procurement, health department, police, to use them in a different way that's victim sensitive. Now, I also understood a question perhaps about the access to information. All of the cases that I've gone over are legal precedents. I'm happy to help, however, to provide BSG and other groups with access, regular access to this kind of information, which is how I sort of understood the question. Please let me know if I didn't. But there's also groups like Polaris, which is a national group that continuously puts out reports. The UNODC, which Sanjay sir quoted, which you also were quoting, sir. So there's a ton of information. I'm happy to help out. However, there's legal precedences, as I mentioned. So if you have a lawyer on your team, they can also have, if they have access to some of the LexisNexis or those legal databases, they could do a simple search and these cases would come up. Many of the searches, the cases I talked about, at least 2 of them were premiered in the New York Times. On LinkedIn, there's a great deal of anti-trafficking advocates raising awareness, not only about the BAPS case, but other cases. So just let me know how I'm able to help provide a more systematic way to have access to that information, or if there are resources I can link you to or introductions I can make, I'd be happy to do it. I hope that answers all of the questions.
Extremely thankful. It's a very good beginning. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking more time, Sanjay sir.
No, it's all right, Jagannath. I'm just thinking that we should have more time, in fact. So let's say if any other attendees have questions. So, Minal, I will like to ask questions. So I was reading about this trafficking and all this, and I read that Forbes is saying that this is the most lucrative business in the world, and it has around $140 billion. The people means who are these culprits, they are gaining around $150 billion of this thing. So considering this, how this particular nexus can be broken, and especially when I was talking to you before start of this meeting about the BAPS case. So they must be spending billions and billions of dollars on this construction of the temple. But at the same time, they are paying just pittance or making basically the workers as their slave. So how this nexus can be broken? What are the the remedies we have for this one?
I think the biggest thing we can do is continue to raise awareness by doing forums like this, because it doesn't happen to our South Asian brothers and sisters just in this case if it's adjudicated in their favor, but it happens all over the world for different reasons. One of the biggest sources is lack of economic opportunities. The source countries are countries where there's a great deal of poverty, there's a lack of opportunity, there might be a great deal of illiteracy. So if we're looking at like the root causes, those are the things that contribute and force people to migrate from their home countries, right? And go to different places to seek that opportunity and seek the sustenance they need to provide for their families. So that's a massive, complex issue, dealing with India's economics, access, the injustices that the caste system and the oppression that the caste system leads to there, and the lack of opportunity it purposefully leads to there, despite the efforts of the Indian government with the schedule caste, the benefits for caste folks through those schedule jobs, So I think that's a problem. Now, us here in the US, you can either be reactive or proactive. And those are two different ways to address this stuff. So a lot of the proactive things are through municipalities, state governments, federal governments, okay? Advocacy, I know Indian people.
You are breaking again, Minalji.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
I apologize for that. Is that any better if I get a little closer?
I think, yeah, if you
Okay.
get closer, it's a little bit
It's
closer.
okay now. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And so, you can be proactive or reactive here in the US, right? So a lot of the proactive things we've done through municipal government, they have led to a great deal of awareness, a great deal of prevention. So you can do that at the local government, the state government, the federal government. There's already a number of anti-trafficking measures and agencies that are involved. I think on the reactive side, if this case is adjudicated properly, that will do its own work in raising a great deal of awareness. So I think we have to hope for justice in that case. And so it's a very, complex way to engage, right? So there's a lot, I think, that can be done.
Okay. Thank you. Jagannath, you have one more question?
One more. I would like to take one more minute.
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Actually, Minalji, we have International Court of Justice, Hague, the Netherlands, and the UN Human Rights. I want to know, are there any cases taken from the New York Times and such publications? Some of the cases you mentioned are so powerful. The Hindus bringing labors for their temples, and as Sanjay sir rightly pointed out, it runs to billions. It's such a big racket. But the media, which is controlled by vested interests again, for example, in India or elsewhere, it will not reflect. I think the United Nations Human Rights, then the International Court of Justice, they should be sensitized. Because, somehow I am not very convinced about awareness only. It has to be coupled with action, sustainable action. Because I want to conclude by saying that we have 73rd and 74th Amendment to Constitution in India for decentralized governance. And recently, the Epidemic Act of 1897 has been revoked for National Disaster Management Act of 2005, which gave a big boost for the Indian, legal fraternity, the Supreme Court to act. Today, Indian Dalits are saved, surviving because of the court, because of Manrega, because of the ration card, which Ram Vilas Paswanji was in the helm of affairs. So what I want to summarily say, just awareness may not be adequate. It could lead into academics curriculum, it could get into the public interest litigation, things like that. Kindly, help us in getting these cases so that some groups in both in USA and also in India can get on to and tap the door. You see, I want to just conclude by saying that forum started by Dr. Ambedkar. It is a group of parliamentarians and legislators in India. And retired Chief Justice Balakrishnan Saab is the chairman of the advisory committee. I'm another member there. Forum of SCST, legislators and parliamentarians. They will be very glad. They'll be very glad to take up your clue. You see, you'll be making a great, effort for us to go beyond awareness. This is what I'm interested.
Yeah. So Jagannath ji, I think it is a very good suggestions, and we will see whether we can coordinate between you and Minal ji to see that whatever the information you are looking for, you get it, and so that you can proceed further on this particular. So we have the next speaker, Somnath ji. Sorry, a next question from Somnath ji.
Hi, thank you, Minal. Thank you very much for your very powerful presentation and work on the ground. I work with communities in India who are also very vulnerable to trafficking and do get trafficked, and most of them are Adivasi and Dalit communities, and their labor is used constantly to build the big shiny towers and whatnot. So, and I saw in your presentation, you said you had also engaged with some places in India. Would you kindly throw some light on that?
Sure. The U.S. Department of State asked me to do a 10-day, 4-city itinerary for them in 2018. Our mayor agreed to go ahead and let me go for those 10 days. I hadn't been to India in years myself, but I went, and I was in Hyderabad, Chennai, Vijayawada, and Calcutta. And we talked to government leaders from the region. We talked to local police. We talked to chiefs of police. We talked to a lot of different people. We talked to Dr. Sunita Krishnan, International Justice Mission, some just wonderful people that I'm not even remembering right now because it's a little bit ago. And we exchanged ideas, and there's a lot of great work being done on the ground in India. So thank you for the work that you do. But that's what we did. I met with bricklayers that had been encouraged by IJM to speak up, and the International Justice Mission does a lot of work through the legal system there, right? And the laws that are on the books that others have mentioned already, and making sure that they're seeing that kind of legal justice. So that's what that trip involved. It was a long, lucrative trip. Yeah, is there anything else I can answer about that trip?
No, I just wanted to understand, and this International Justice Mission is someone I have also worked with laborers from Odisha. So thank you very much for your response.
Yeah, there was a wonderful woman there. I think her name was Marin, out of the Chennai office. She was amazing, a powerhouse, I thought. So I'll just, in case there's a way you can connect with her if you haven't already.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minal. Thank you, Somnathji. We have a question from Dr. Ambedkar, and then I believe one on the chat. So first, let's go with the Dr. Ambedkar. Okay, please ask your question.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning. This is from Good Morning here from, I'm from Chennai.
Yeah, Ambedkar ji, go ahead.
Okay, Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim.
Yeah. So the presentation is very nice. They are well organized. G has given, Minal G has given very organized manner, structure, very organized presentation. So congrats to Madam G, Minal G. And so the US, North America, US having well developed and organized, they having the civil rights. But here, our country in India, where we are facing massive abuses of human rights. We are struggling with human abuses. So, Madam Minal G has said she's connected with this government in Chennai, Tamil Nadu. She has said so. This kind of organized thing will be elevate the people from this emancipation from their abuses. So the link between the international organization with the local governments. So I am the end part of the India. This is the southern part of India. I am very glad to hear Minal Ji said she came Chennai and she observed, she meet more secretaries like that, government officials, higher officials, she met like that. She said that, very happy to hear that. Thank you very much, Ji. So we have to full access in and around the country to give the report to like any other organization where they are abusing our people. So like that, any linkage is given to us means it's very useful to save our people.
Okay, I think so. So Jagannath ji, I understand your question correctly. You are saying that someone from the US should provide that information to you about what is happening in India, or within the India, we should get you connected to someone who can provide you that information. What is exactly your ask?
Sanjay ji, what I want to mention here is, see, with Minal ji's presentation, one thing is certain, and also our Dr. Ambedkar who spoke just now. See, there is a link required from the top to bottom. the bottom people affected are voiceless.
Yes.
And here in US, Minalji, for example, and many persons and institutions in Boston Study Group also. See, on the top, you have a lot of information. At the end, we don't have that sort of an activism, but concern is there. So it's time to activate at international level, the UN and the International Court of Law and Forum here in India. Forum has got all the SC, ST legislators and parliamentarians. I'm an advisory committee member for that. You see, if you can link us, Boston Study Group can be the vehicle for us here. It can open up a very important solution. I call it as a tunnel effect. In the mountain of burden and resistance today, we can think of a way out. This is how I want to usually.
Yeah. So, Jagannath, thank you very much. And we will see as a organization what Boston Study Group can do to bridge this particular gap, and if we can provide some information to you. But many of the reports, I believe, are available online also. So when I was preparing for these presentations, I found so much information, and there are so many videos on YouTube about the this particular trafficking and all these we should be aware of. So please go through that, and I will try to provide the information I have with me. And as far as the report is concerned, so definitely we will check with Minal. She has contacts with Indian counterparts and all this. So if we can find out some source there, that will be really nice. So before I ask Patel to ask a questions, I think there is a question in the chat from Preeti. Preeti, would you like to ask this question yourself, or you want me to read it? Preeti, can you unmute yourself? Okay. So Preeti, yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, my question is like, hello, Minal. My question is like, can you please tell me, like, if there are traffic cases, traffic victims are once rescued, and they are like sent back to the home, and the parents have sold them for some or the other reason, in exchange of some amount of money, and once they are sent back to home, what is the guarantee they won't be sold again? And what precautions India can take in, especially in rural areas where there's a vast varieties of poverty, and families are facing, and they are like trafficking and like selling their girls and children's, and re-trafficking is happening again and again. So what kind of precautions India can take on it?
So I'll tell you about an example I learned of when I was there visiting. It was an initiative, I think it's called Sayang Siddha. I might have that wrong. But it was started by a chief inspector, which I believe is the title of a chief police officer in India. And it's a movement in the rural areas where the community took charge of what was happening, because they were seeing traffickers come into the rural areas, lure the girls away with something as simple as a mobile phone, right? Because those things aren't widely accessible in the rural areas. So he started through the schools, the rural village schools, and he's in over 400 districts the last time I emailed him. An amazing program, literally teaching the 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old girls to empower them and take back their lives. So they do marches in the villages, little girls walking through the streets of the villages to raise awareness. They include the male fathers, of course, the mothers. Oftentimes in the context that I saw it in or learned about it in, it was Muslim communities. They do street art, folk theater, because there's a level of illiteracy there, right? So they tell the story about how this is wrong, how your child can be sold for things that you're not anticipating through folk theater and art on the village street corners. And they have done a tremendous amount of work to drive traffickers out of the rural areas there. I would really suggest getting in touch with the group and the chief inspector, or trying to replicate his model across your rural areas in India is probably the most effective thing we'll ever see. And it was just, I've met hundreds of those girls because I visited one of the schools. It was amazing teaching them about just empowerment as a woman or a girl in India. That's a big deal. You know, we all know what it can be like growing up there. So that's the recommendation I'd have. Just tremendous work. To answer your question directly, if they're returned to home and there aren't these kinds of groundswell of activities, there's nothing you can do to keep their parents to do, to do this to them again, right? So there needs to be that kind of activation from the community level, the school. It needs to include the fathers. If there's a level of illiteracy, there has to be a creative solution like the street theater and the folk art that they tell the stories through. So.
Priti, did you get your answer?
Yeah, Minal. But another doubt is that, I mean, how can you make parents understand that, it's like selling children, selling girls, for some reason is not good, for their life and for their, future. And, and there are so many girls who are like, from trafficking, they are entering into sex work. And like I recently went to field work in Kolkata, where I found, like, they said my parents have sold me, but now I'm stable. I'm like, I'm adjusted in this brothel, and now I'm trying to be happy, trying to adjust in this sex work, and I don't call myself as a victim anymore. Either it was like trafficked case earlier, but now it's like they're trying to just live their life. Yeah, so I think there should be some I don't know, there should be some classes or something to for parents actually in India, because in rural India, rural villages, where parents are simply selling for on the name of poverty. If there are 7 girls and they are like, uh, who will marry them? We don't have enough money. They will ask dowry. So it's better to sell them, and at least they will get some amount of money to have food to feed these other kids.
Okay.
So it's a very, very difficult and annoying situation which I have found in my field when I went to Sonagachi and other red light areas.
Yeah. I mean, I think the model I'm talking about, it actually has all of the elements you're talking about, including education for parents. And over time, there has been that change. And because of the way the girls took the streets back and they had the support of their community, the traffickers stopped going there over time, so they do incorporate those elements.
Okay, thank you.
Actually,
I hope you, Jagannath, just a minute, please. I will call
take
you
30
back.
seconds.
Yeah, Jagannath, no, I will call you back. Just please hold on. So Priti, I hope you got the name of the organization, what Minalji is referring to. And in case it is not, we will ask Minal to, if she can put in the chat box so that you can get it right. So Jagannathji, before that, I will ask Payal. She has raised the hand before you. So I will ask her to.
I'll wait.
Yeah, these are questions. Yeah, Payal, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Minal, for your presentation. I think actually many of my questions are pretty similar to what Preeti has raised, but I just wanted to, I guess, maybe draw attention to 2 points I would love to hear more about. So I think both of these questions sort of have to do with the precarity of just temporary visas and visas in general when it comes to workers who are being trafficked and are being moved around. So first, I would love to hear more about what happens to these workers, after these court cases, even if they are able to get the money or get some sort of justice through the system. Are they in a precarious position and are they able to get, oh, sorry, my phone keeps cutting in and out. So I hope you're still able to hear me.
I Are
they still able to have pathways to being able to work in the US? Are they being deported after a short amount of time? You know, given that they've faced such intense exploitation, are they able to get the services and support they need to really move into jobs and employment that give them stability outside of coercion? And secondly, how I'm curious to hear more about the ways your office is navigating, you know, doing anti-trafficking work along with, you know, the work of labor migration by migrant sex workers and folks who are both in the US or who are coming to the US as sex workers to, you know, move away from the structural inequalities they're facing in their home companies, the risks of deportation, things like that, and how we're ensuring that their dignity and their rights are being upheld through this framework. Hopefully that made sense.
I might ask you to repeat your second question, but for your first one, if they get a trafficking visa, that provides permanent pathways to citizenship in the United States, not only for them, but they can also apply for their families. There's a great deal of personal choice after that, right? About who. Many people choose to go home. Many people, if they don't get the trafficking visa, you're here illegally. So yes, you can be deported. But there's a myriad of ways that things can happen after someone is, or big case is adjudicated, okay? So if they get the trafficking visa, it could lead to permanent pathways to citizenship. If they don't, and they only get a continued presence and they testify, after that, they can be sent back home. As far as services available, there's a plethora. It's just a matter of whether or not they have access to it. Now, the federal government agencies that often conduct these sort of busts or raids, we've had our fair share here in the Houston area.
Minal, again, you are breaking, please.
Oh, okay. So the federal agencies that work in this area, they are connected with victim service aid organizations. So a lot of times, if it's a federal case, they're automatically receiving services.
Please try to use the headphone if you have.
From partners.
Try to use the headphone if you have.
No, it's all right. It's all right. Go ahead. No, it's okay.
Right now, thank you for the suggestion, though. So, basically, they're able to go ahead and get those services through partners with the regional federal agencies that do this. Now, I might need you to repeat this, but as far as the sex worker movement, you know, my remit here is the Houston area. And when I do the work that I do, we don't have like an organized sex worker movement here in Houston, like New York does, or like San Francisco does. So my experience with that here locally is limited. We do know that there's irregular migration that happens. So for example, the illicit massage parlors, and please let me know if I'm getting very far away from your question here, but the illicit massage parlors, so you have women that may be of Korean descent or Chinese descent, and Korean descent growing up in China, so there's a language vulnerability, right? You've not been able to go to school and get educated. So all of that happening, and those women moving through not only the US, but illicit parlors throughout the world, because of the structural restrictions and systems and all of the things that you mentioned. When they end up here in Houston, we do the very best that we can. If there's an investigative bust here through our local PD, because we have our fair share of these illicit massage parlors. When they're interacting with police, I have to say it's difficult for us to break through to the East Asian community, but they're not presenting themselves as a, you know, sex worker union, if you will. So again, the experience here in Houston is very limited when it comes to that. So I hope that answers your question, even though I couldn't really answer your second question.
Well,
yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think we will take 2 more questions. One from the Padmaji. She's asking for the first time. So Jagannathji, we will please hold for yourself. Let's Padmaji ask a question and then we'll go back to you.
Yeah. That's okay. That's okay. Please.
Yeah, just we wanted to finish in next 3-4 minutes. So Padmaji, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Minal, and thank you, Boston Study Group, for organizing this absolutely fantastic presentation. Minal, I was really happy to hear that the Indian workers were awarded millions after the US firm Signal was found guilty of trafficking. I remember going to a few protests in Boston in solidarity with the workers organized by some immigrant rights group here, but somehow did not follow up on this. So my question is with regard to religious places of worship and how they're trafficking poor workers, largely from Dalit caste. I'm just a little curious and concerned. Some of these religious places of worship have a lot of connections, political connections here and in India. And I just worry about the outcome. I'm not sure if we have any further information with regard to this, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
My sources are the public, the publications, so the New York Times, things like that. I think in my experience, the FBI is an agent of the United States government, but they function extremely independently. That's been my experience with them every time. So I think that we need to wait and watch. Of course, we're allowed to have concerns and worries and things like that. And I think that if there's any agency that's able to challenge power structures or political connections or whatever might exist, the FBI, if they bring a case and the U.S. Attorney's Office takes it, it's where we have those checks and balances, right, built into the American government. And these branches are different from each other, like the executive branch and the political connections, and the fact that India is an ally, right? Of course, and we should generally be glad that India is an ally of the U.S. government, right? So I think that there's a reason the way the U.S. government is set up. Let's see what the U.S. Attorney's Office does and follow it closely. And then there should, this may be very unpopular sentiment for this group, but we also need to understand in America, it's innocent until proven guilty. And so the case does need to be, heard out for both parties. We would want that if the tables were turned, right? So it's also important to remember the innocent until proven guilty, that the US government will have to, the feds, if it goes to that level, will have to produce a case that meets a certain standard, right? Of course. And we want that. Those are the things that make America great. And so it's also good to have that check and balance, despite our personal opinions on what we think happened, what we're seeing being reported, right? So let's wait and watch and see.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Padmaji. Thank you, Minal. And I think we are going to end with this last question from Jagannathji. If Jagannathji, I hope that this question is different and related to the topics we are discussing.
This question is very specific.
Okay, please be specific.
To Preeti ji and Padmaji, I want to share a question. Why not we look at Minalji rightly mentioned? You see, the cultural signals, what I mean to say, the folklore, the cultural and active judges, for example. In India, we have some judges who are from Dalit community who are bold enough to take serious action on the exploitation of the girls, very young girls. So what we find in America, awarding millions of dollars as compensation is already happening in India, at least in a very small way. Why don't you look at that? Padmaji and also Preeti ji, look at these cases. They are giving solutions. And human labor is the second large, the oldest profession of mankind. If a person sells his labor or body, nothing new. How to come out of it is what Dr. Ambedkar taught us. That's how we have to look at it. Not worry about the rehabilitation. You have to live through. You have to live through. It's a climate change or a disaster or a pandemic, you have to live through. This is also a case like that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jagannathji, for I think you have concluded very well. Thank you very much. So, Minalji, any concluding thoughts before we close?
I just want to thank everybody for their time. I hope my maiden name didn't set off any alarms. I appreciate you being here so much. I consider you all my South Asian brothers and sisters. So I really do appreciate having you here with me today. And thank you for listening and your thoughtful questions.
Thank you.
Sadhu,
thank you very much. So with that, we are going to conclude this session. Thank you, Minal. It was a very nice session. In fact, I learned a lot. And just to prepare for these sessions, I had gone through so much information and all this, and during that means watching some of the videos was so painful. I'm telling you that there was some PBS videos on Arizona, what is happening there, or in Nevada, and something in Iowa states and all this. So it is really painful to watch, even if those are related to the people from the US and some from the South America, not anything related to our South Asian. But still, it is painful to see how these kids, girls are subjected to the exploitations and their life gets shattered. So thank you very much for bringing this particular issue to our audience. Thank you very much. And thank to all the audience who had joined from India as well as America. Thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of the day.